My role in Cape May, for the most part, I serve as the migration and monitoring coordinator for New Jersey Audubon's Cape May Bird Observatory. So we have 3 different bird migration counts in the fall and this new one in the spring that we'll be talking about tonight. And that is the focus of most of my work, and happy to talk a little bit about some of that tonight. So the Cape May Bird Observatory has been around since the mid-1970s, and now for about 45 years, we've been monitoring bird and monarch butterfly migration at Land's End here at the south tip of New Jersey. Most of that work, and I promise this is the most boring of the slides we got, most of that work is through these visible migration counts. So there's various ways that folks all the way around the world and all through North America monitor the passage of migration, both in spring and fall. And so the method that we use in Cape May are the stationary counts that can go for a portion or an entire day, and then across usually about a 3-month-long season for an individual count. So again, the most probably well-known version of these are hawk watches. Plenty of hawk watches all through Eastern North America. We have one of the only sea watches at Avalon that operates on a full-time basis in the fall. Morning flight count at the Higbee Beach in the fall, and our new SpringWatch, which counts all the birds and operates in the mornings in the spring. So again, those are the 3 main projects that we had before. So before we talk about the SpringWatch, it's probably important to kind of look at the entire context of these counts in Cape May. So this is a photo back from 1976 of Pete Dunn sitting on a lifeguard stand, the original Cape May Hawk Watch. And through Pete's efforts, that project grew through the years through a couple different platforms that people older than me, I'm sure, may be familiar with, and has now morphed into this state-of-the-art birding platform, and the Hawkwatch now well into its 40s in terms of how many years it's been collecting data. We have the Avalon Sea Watch, our water bird migration count up the coast in Avalon. It's about 13, 14 miles north of Cape May. And that sticks out a little bit farther in the ocean, so it concentrates the water bird migrants in the fall. But as you can see, it started in a parking lot. It grew in a parking lot as more and more people got into sea watching. And now, with the help of the borough of Avalon, we have this really great shelter, so the person doing the counting can actually get out of the rain when it rains and when there's awful sea spray from the nor'easters. And it's a great site, and I know many of you have been there. Morning flight project. Really, Cape May experienced something of a British invasion in the 80s. So Gillian Huff there, Richard Crossley, Paul Holt. A lot of those guys kind of started a lot of this morning flight work. A guy named David Sibley was heavily involved in that. But that was it was a casual kind of informal thing for many years. It wasn't until the early 2000s that a more standardized protocol came along. At the same time, a lot more information was coming out about learning how to identify birds in flight through photographic advances, through learning their flight calls. And then we were able also to have more of an ability to predict kind of when and where birds would be migrating via NexRad weather radar. And today, again, morning flight is a standardized project where we've been collecting data now for the better part of 2 decades. One of the only places that have a data set going back that long on active songbird migration. And as you can see, it's also grown in popularity. So what comes next? Well, everything on the right side of the lighthouse there, everything in the fall has always been pretty well covered, but the spring's always been a bit of a mystery. So about 10 years ago, a few of us decided to go out to the dune crossover at Coral Avenue, the very, very southwest part of the peninsula in Cape May. and look at what was flying past in the spring. Now, if you're something like, say, a northern gannet, we'll see if we can get this here video to work. This is sort of what you see. So if you're a gannet, if you're a scoter, if you're a red-throated loon, this is the view. If you're a migrating land bird that's been drifted off the Delaware coast at night and are coming back into land, this is what you see. And so you get down to the absolute mouth of the bay here, right at the absolute corner. And this really serves as a concentration point. Significantly in fall, but also we found in spring for both water birds and land birds. And so a little drone video here will end with a view of the Coral Avenue platform, about smack dab in the middle of the screen there now. And then this is a view from the deck itself. So again, the overall location being at the corner of the peninsula is important, but we also have really good sight lines from here, so we can see up and down the dunes for land bird migrants. Then we have an unobstructed view off into the Delaware Bay to our right, and to the start of the Atlantic Ocean off to our left for various different lines of water bird migrants. I'll try not to do too much bragging in this, but we do take a lot of pride in the fact that you can see a heck of a lot of birds just from this little platform. And so when we started doing this, really one of the really attractive features was the fact that you could see a huge diversity of birds in addition to a big number. So this is the hotspot on eBird for the Coral Ave dune crossing. Since it's been created, there's been 337 species observed here. If you look in the United States page on eBird, you'll find that it's the number 44 hotspot in the entire country. So it's not bad for a little 15 by 15 platform. So in the early days, there was a lot of just volunteer, organic effort out there. We didn't really know much. You know, if probably a lot of folks have a copy or two of Sibley's Birds of Cape May, published in the 90s. If you read through it, there's really not much about many species, especially land birds. There's a lot of sentences about doesn't occur in any kind of migratory movements in the spring. Migratory movements don't seem to happen on a regular basis. So we were kind of out to see if that was right and see what else we might find. And one time we really did start to see a number of things that were pretty interesting. We'll touch on a lot of those later on. And we were able to grow the project really from the ground up. And again, this was really before it had any sort of official connection with New Jersey Audubon. But you can see in this picture, we have a number of folks, New Jersey Audubon staff, volunteers, and then some of the younger folks there were actually part of our initial volunteer program. So we had folks come from around the United States, Canada, and even Sweden to help grow the project. So this culminated in New Jersey Audubon officially adopting the project in a standardized fashion with professional hired staff in 2019. If you walk up to the platform now, this is what you'll see. So it gives you a little bit of insight into the varied nature of everything that we count here in the spring. So what is it about? What are we doing? What we ended up with after about 10 years of collecting preliminary data, we start to count March 1st, it ends May 31st. Every single day, somebody's up there counting birds for at least 4 hours. On a better day, we'll go to about 6 hours. There's days when birds continue moving in the afternoon, but what you get for all that time out there is typically pretty darn limited. So we are in a residential area there. We're also in an area that gets a lot of beach traffic. So it's a bit of a compromise on our part to allow folks who live and visit there to have unobstructed access to that platform, which is really popular. And unlike the fall, where we have each project focusing on a set of species, we record all the species in the spring, simply because the volume of birds that pass through Cape May in the spring is really a fraction of what we'll see in the fall. So again, main objectives, we're looking at both the timing and the volume of migration. When do birds arrive? When are the peak movements? When do they leave? And just as importantly, will that change over time? I think with spring migration, we might expect to see the climate-related changes occur at a faster rate. So that's something that we're looking into. We also, when possible, also record data on whether what we're looking at are adults or immatures, males or females. Again, not always possible, but when we can, we try to do that, and we are working on comparing various demographics within species. We're looking at various water birds that utilize the mouth of the bay. It's a very important staging area. So birds that may not necessarily always be migrating actively at one time, but do accumulate in big numbers, and finding ways to record that. And then, as I alluded to, establishing links between large scale weather patterns, water temperature, other factors that may affect what we're looking at. Now, trying to conduct a spring migration count on a southward facing peninsula does come with its challenges. One of the things that we can see at the beginning of the season is either we've missed the beginning of it or we're way ahead of it based on how February looks. So you get years when February is very cold, and we kind of sit up there and twiddle our thumbs for the first couple of weeks, and other years where it feels like we've missed the first 2 or 3 weeks because it's been really warm. There's big volume and big diversity on certain days. Again, because we're trying to count every single thing, it can be a little daunting. There's distant birds all the time because, unlike the fall, we don't have any of those concentrating factors. And then related to that, all sorts of various flight lines and flight directions, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here. This is some very crudely drawn out flight paths that we see at Avalon in the fall. Again, pretty cut and dry. Everything flies from point A to point B. Higbee Beach, most things fly point A to point B. Based on the wind direction or wind speed, they may fly behind you, in front of you, or over your head. And we have the Hawk Watch, where things like kestrels and sharp-shinned hawks typically will turn the corner, head back north until they find a narrower crossing. Those are the curved arrows there. And the straight arrows would be things like peregrine falcons and ospreys that have no issue of crossing the water. So slightly more complicated, but still relatively cut and dry. And now I'll introduce you to what we look at with the Cape May SpringWatch. These are all the primary flight lines. So we've got all sorts of things, and I won't even start to explain which is which there, but I think you get the idea what we're dealing with on a daily basis. So data entry, this was sort of a step forward for us as an organization. Traditionally, we recorded data like this. So this is from the Avalon Sea Watch. Somebody would have to stand there and pound away on those keys and click away on those little tally counters for an hour straight, and then try to figure out where to scribble those numbers from the various clickers into all these columns here. Inevitably, I would write something in a wrong box and spill coffee all over a data sheet on a daily basis. So I didn't really like that. Not to mention, all of that had to go into an Excel spreadsheet at the end of the season. So 2016, we came across, via some of our international partners, this app called Trek Tellen, based out of the Netherlands. And it is a global network of bird migration count. So we've got ground surveys here. We've got migration counts, kind of like hawk watches or sea watches in here. The little microphone ones are actually people recording nocturnal flight calls. And then we've got also bird banding data. You can see a little band on the legs next to those sites. Here is what our data looks like. This is today's data. So you can see we're enjoying quite a few of these scarce terns right now. So roseate tern is particularly numerous with this big storm system that we're dealing with right now. But again, this is it's pretty cut and dry end of the day. You know, I enter everything into a tablet. It goes right into the cloud. And at the end of the day, if I have to make any edits, it only takes a few clicks. And it's a really nice feature for folks if they want to decide whether to roll out of bed and come birding, or if they're just viewing from afar. Gives people a little more connection to what's going on. So that said, let's jump into some of the birds that we see at SpringWatch. So we'll start with kind of one of the main keystone species early in the season. It's northern gannet. And again, this is also generated straight from the Trek-Talon website. So anybody can go on the Trek-Talon site and toy with a bunch of the data, which is it's pretty cool. So we can see a distinct peak in just the about 6 or 7 years worth of Trek-Talon data we have here now. So a really strong peak here in late March, early April. And we also have the ability to look at the record counts through the Trek-Talon website, and that'll show us kind of the same thing. So we had the record gannet day of all time earlier this year with over 18,000 exiting the bay in a single morning. And then because we're able via the Trek-Talon app to record with each individual bird, whether it's an adult or an immature, we can also track the timing of that. So here's a good example. You see the blue line there climbing pretty steadily all through March and then peaking out. That's about, once it gets to the top there, that's 100% of the season total for gannet. And then the immatures really don't start up very good until, you know, early April. Typically by about April 10th, we see the immatures outnumber the adults then. So again, that's something we probably could have guessed ahead of time, but it's really nice to have the data that shows that. Common loon, another one, bird that is, you know, in decline, and a bird that we see on a regular basis in the spring. So once again, this one shows a pretty nice little bell curve with a pretty strong peak in mid or late April. We can get days with 200 or 300, 400 common loons migrating past, which was a heck of a lot more than we thought were flying through before we started this. Here's an example of a recent newcomer, really. This used to be a really rare bird, white ibis in Cape May, and now they nest here. In fact, this year they may nest by the hundreds once we really get out and figure out what's going on. But we're seeing that increase also at the SpringWatch. So you can see none in 2016, 17, 18, and then you can see 19, 20, 21, and now the 22 season, way beyond even last year, and we still have 3 more weeks to count some more. So let's see if we can push that up toward about 1,000. We counted 1,300 white ibis migrating south from the Hawkwatch last fall, so we kind of know we know what's possible. So it's a very interesting species to monitor right now, and one that I think we're well positioned to track in migration, both spring and fall. These are willets, and I handheld this video, so it's not the world's greatest. But these are actually eastern willets, which you typically won't see in the surf. But we had some, I think, some thunderstorms the night before and some fog, and I think these birds kind of put down on their way across the bay. So this was part of a pretty big movement. I think 200 or 300 willets migrated past on this day. And turns out that we typically will see between 500 and 1,000 of these migrate past. These eastern willets come up from Brazil. They winter in mangrove swamps. So really a pretty interesting bird. And here's the chart for this one that shows, again, really none here until about maybe the 6th or 7th of April. Typically is when they arrive, and then they quickly peak as migrants during the 2nd, 3rd, 4th week of April. And then we see very few migrants after that. Here's one we always like, Merlin. So our raptor migration in the spring kind of works the opposite of the fall, right? So we have that big southward facing funnel in the fall. So all these birds end up right down at the end there. Well, in the spring, that big body of water kind of acts as a block. So we don't get hardly as many. In fact, after big cold fronts, much like the fall, we'll get bigger numbers of soaring birds, things like broadwing hawks or Mississippi kites later in May. But Merlin is one that doesn't care about making a water crossing. So it's one that we see not in big numbers. But again, we're able to see that there's a pretty strong peak for this bird during the second half of April. And I think with a lot of the cold weather we've been having this year, some of those are delayed. So I think actually our high count for the season will be from early May this year. This is probably my favorite bird to watch migrate in the spring. They're highly variable year to year, red-headed woodpeckers. This is a group of 4. I think this was a day last year when we saw either 40 or 50 in a single day migrate by. They do love to concentrate along the dunes in the spring, and to see them in little groups, sometimes getting up real high and departing back west across the bay again. It's really awesome to see. And so these migrate in a fairly narrow window in the spring is what we're discovering. So very few before the last few days of April, and then they quickly ramp up. So this is the cumulative total for each day that we've counted over the years. So you can see where the peak is, really right between about April 29th and May 5th. Unfortunately, with all the east winds and rain and cold weather, I think we've only counted 2 all spring so far this year. So unless there's a bunch of late ones, I think we're going to have a bit of a flop on those this time around. And, you know, in general with land birds, whether they're songbirds or hawks, you know, they're very episodic in nature. So we really do need consistent west winds in the spring to bring these birds out, you know, across the Delaware Bay into Cape May. The kingbird's a great example of this. Again, you can see a lot of the other species kind of had these very nice up and down bell curves through the season for their weekly totals. Here's a bird that really shows not much of a pattern, in large part because we see big numbers of them whenever we get late season cold fronts. So if it's a really nice day, we might see a few zipping by, but it's not until you get those strong northwest winds and a lot colder weather where they concentrate back down into the Cape again. So again, one of those tricky ones that kind of surprise you. So that's just a little subset. I could go through those graphs for another 100 or 50 species, but we'll leave that for another time. One of the things that we really want to focus on with this project we're looking at the climate impacts and changing weather systems and how that will affect both the volume and the timing and which species even that we're going to see in Cape May going forward. So this is a little screen grab from a couple of years ago. You might remember in late May, there was this very early tropical system that formed off the southeast coast. And you got weather a lot like what we got right now. Lots of strong east winds pushing a lot of pelagic migrants inshore. You know, this was a highly unusual event. And so we had a single day with 19 Arctic terns that flew past. I think we saw 30 some for the season. That was after I think I'd seen 3 or 4 from shore in Cape May all time. So again, our project isn't there to find rare birds. I know sometimes it may seem that way, but you know, again, us being there during this event allowed us to capture this in a way we wouldn't really have been otherwise. That same event, again, it was a prolonged stretch of easterlies. This is the only spring Pomeranian Jaeger adult that I've seen from shore in Cape May. And so, like I said, we're now experiencing that right now. So a current example, you know, we had wind gusts here over the weekend to about 70, 75 miles per hour for a while on Saturday. It's been pretty extreme. I got 2 trees in my side yard here that are the top halves of them are gone. There was a new construction project that totally collapsed on the road into Stone Harbor. So this is what we've seen from a notable standpoint just since Saturday. It's pretty amazing. And it's been northeast again today at about 30 to 40. So I expect we'll see a little bit more of that tomorrow. But again, you know, events like these late season coastal lows and really early season tropical storms or hurricanes, you know, traditionally quite unusual. But is this something that we're going to see more and more of going forward? Can we expect to see Arctic turn, you know, every spring in Cape May now if these sort of systems continue? So that's something we want to look at. And it's just one of the very many applications. So I think that really brings me about to the end. This is the scene. If you come up and join us one day, we'd be happy to have you. And it's just a great place to stand and watch birds. And I know many of you have already been there. So we'll wrap up. This is probably my very favorite photo that I've taken from the platform there. It's yellow-billed cuckoo that kind of arrived off the water, dove into the pines next to the platform, and then continued on its way up the beach a couple of years ago in the middle of May. So you never know what you're going to see. You know, in an average spring season, we'll see about 200, 215 species just from the platform here. So even in seasons where the numbers aren't that great, we're always seeing a lot of different birds. And so it's kind of the unexpected that kind of keeps you coming back every single day.